Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. We are going to, in this recording, we're going to start discussing the Apology by Plato. It's a sort of fictionalized account of the life of Socrates. And just so you know, almost every introduction to philosophy class is going to cover Plato and Socrates in some way or another. In fact, I used to teach Plato and Socrates in my last introduction to philosophy classes. I taught a different writing by Plato. I've decided to switch to this one for your class, though, for a number of reasons. One is that it's shorter. The other thing I taught was about 3 times this length, 3 or 4 times. And partly, I want you, since this is an introduction to philosophy class, instead of just teaching you some things that Plato and Socrates said, I really thought it was important to emphasize why it matters, or to sort of show you who Socrates was. Because part of what philosophy has done since his life is define itself in relationship to him. He's not the founder of philosophy exactly, but in a lot of ways he's taken to be the sort of grandfather of Western European philosophy, and that has influenced art and politics and science throughout Western Europe, Northern Europe, Central Europe, England, and America. And through America, really through the whole world. I can't convince you of that super long history. I just said, philosophy through Socrates has affected the whole world up to the present day. But there's lots of people who believe it, and to just float that as an idea in this first class, that philosophy, far from being useless or just being the wild ravings of an individual, it can actually go on and have great long-term effects. And that's something I thought would be more fun and more valuable to show you. So I'm turning to this reading because this reading shows it quite well. Okay. I gave you a little context inside of the inside of Canvas. Just to summarize that in the briefest terms right now, Socrates lived in Athens, which is now in Greece, in a time of great change and upheaval. It was really chaotic. Because of all the chaos, you had people who were allies and then they were enemies, and then all these shifting alliances meant that a lot of people were seeking revenge and trying to wipe out competition. So because of who Socrates was friends with, more so than anything he had done, because of who he was friends with in this dangerous time to be in politics, there were some people. Their names are Meletus, Antius, and Lycon. There were these 3 people who wanted to take Socrates out, wanted to embarrass him and make him so embarrassed that he would move away, and so they brought these charges against him. So this account we're going to read is a fictionalized account from Socrates' friend Plato about what happened once these charges had been brought against Socrates. Okay? Just very quickly, Plato is a philosopher as well. He was friends with Socrates, and he followed basically in his philosophical teachings once Socrates passed away, once he was dead. Okay? Here's something funny and interesting, and you wouldn't know it just from this reading. Socrates, easily one of the most famous philosophers in the world. Easily. He never wrote down a single word of philosophy. Just stop and think about that. It's sort of surprising. He's one of the most famous philosophers in the world. And many people think of philosophy as being books, right? Big, old books with heavy, abstract ideas. But Socrates thought that when you wrote ideas down it sort of corrupted them. It pushed them a little further away from the truth. So he thought real philosophy happened when two or more people got together and talked through the ideas with each other. It's got to be a dialogue, he thinks. He thinks philosophy has to be a dialogue if it's going to be real philosophy done well. So he didn't write anything down philosophically, nothing. So I think there's a few interesting things about this. One is just a surprising historical tidbit. Famous philosopher didn't write any philosophy. Another thing is this, though. If Socrates is right that philosophy isn't just books, then you and I are doing real philosophy after we read the books. When we talk about them. When you write me emails asking questions. When you write me emails with your own ideas. When you go into discussion and talk with each other about what you think together. That's when the real philosophy happens. So you can burn all your books. No, I'm kidding. But if Socrates is right, then the book itself is not with the start and stop of philosophy. It's just part of the tool. It's an important tool, but not the start and stop of it. So philosophy actually gets real when it gets practical and when it gets personal. When it gets practical, when you and I try to put it into practice in our lives. And when it's personal, when it's you and I talking about what we think, not just talking about what Plato wrote 2,500 years ago. I think that's pretty cool. Another interesting point about Socrates not writing down any philosophy is think about most of the people who are famous 2,500 years later. I mean, it's not just philosophers who talk about Socrates. Martin Luther King talks about him. He shows up he's quoted in literature all the time. Politicians will often read Plato's famous book about him called The Republic to learn ideas about politics. So Socrates is still really influential today, but not from anything he wrote down because he didn't write down philosophy. So there's something about Socrates other than writing, even other than what Plato wrote about him. There's something about him that makes him worthy of remembrance today. It's not his writing, so what is it? It's his life. So that's part of why I'm having you read this dialogue, because it really shows what Socrates was like as a person, and it shows his life. That's the true message. That's why Socrates is still famous today, the life which he led. So that's what we'll focus on today, okay? Just a few more things about the influence of Socrates. If you study philosophy, it's a great preparation for law school. There's plenty of reasons why. And if you're thinking about law school, go ahead and shoot me an email and we can talk more about it. We can talk about what specific philosophy classes will best prepare you for that. But philosophy majors do better in law school than any other major, and philosophy majors do better on graduate school and law school test exams than almost any other major. But that's not my point. Oh yes, my point here is another influence of Socrates that's still today is that if you go to law school, you may have heard of this, there's something called Socratic questioning or Socratic line of questioning. What happens is that in law school, the law school professor will call out someone random in the audience and ask them a question. And then they'll go back and forth. I'm not a law school professor. It's a specific way of teaching. Okay? And we still use it today. Now, you've seen Socrates' version of this in the reading you just did today. About pages 6 to 9, where he's talking with Melodus, that's that form of Socratic back and forth dialogue. Okay? In fact, most of what Plato wrote about Socrates is just Socrates questioning people, people responding to him, he responds to them, and it goes back and forth. This one, as you saw, is a bit more of a monologue, but just so you know, Socratic questioning, you see it in today's chunk of the reading. And he's always doing that dialogue in order to try to get to the truth, to clarify the truth, okay? And you've probably seen this in some of your other classes in person as well. College professors use this a lot, not just law school professors. It's a way of not just seeing what you know, but of working from what you do know to other things which you might not know yet. Again, it's this mutual self-improvement by trying to use the truth so that everyone has access to it, not just the teacher, but everyone has access to it. Okay. So that's all context for Socrates, part of why he's important, and part of why the life of Socrates is important, not just things he said, okay, how he lived. And that's just something I want to underline is philosophy is not just learning interesting ideas. Almost all of these ideas are supposed to be able to have some beneficial impact on the way of life that you lead. But I'd say that's enough context for now. I know you're sitting there chomping at the bit. You're saying, great context, but I did the reading. Let's talk about the reading, please. So we will now talk about the reading. Okay, from the very beginning on page 1 of our reading, Socrates says there's a difference between persuasion, or how things appear to be, and the real truth. So he says, wow, I know the truth better than anyone about my own life. When I was hearing my accusers accuse me of crimes, I knew they weren't true, but even I was almost persuaded. That's how persuasively they talked. I almost got swept away in it. He's sort of joking, right? Keep an eye out for Socrates' sly sense of humor throughout the reading, but he means something very true every time he's joking. What he means here is that there's a huge difference between being persuaded or believing something and having the real truth. Okay? Just because we believe something or have been persuaded to believe something doesn't mean it's true. Lies can be very persuasive. Okay? Propaganda in other countries is very persuasive. Think about all these Russians spreading lies on the internet, and then things go viral, and then everyone has been persuaded and believes it, but it's not true. Some hacker in Vladivostok or somewhere in Russia, made it up. There's all these deep fakes, etc. I mean, we don't have to get into all that, but lies can be persuasive, but lies by definition are not true. Propaganda is persuasive, but it's by definition a lie trying to manipulate someone's behavior. Okay? So even in this first line, we can see something important for philosophy and for our lives. Just because someone believes something doesn't make it true. Okay? Now, let's stop here for a second. I bet you believe that. I bet you already knew that, right? I bet you knew that just because someone believes something or has been persuaded that it's true, don't necessarily make it so. Okay? Just because someone believes something doesn't make it true. I bet you have no problem agreeing with that and believing that. Okay. But this is how philosophy works. If that claim is in general true, and you believe that claim, probably that single idea can be applied to other related things. Okay? And unless we have some objection here, if you believe this claim, just because someone believes something is true doesn't make it true. Just because someone's been persuaded doesn't mean they have the truth. Then let's apply that same idea to someone, and let's apply it to you. Someone specific, you. Just because you believe something, just because you personally have been persuaded of something, doesn't mean that you know the truth about that thing. Now let's stop. Probably none of you disputed the first claim. But when I basically apply that same claim, that true idea, to something else, then sometimes we get a little bit of resistance, right? Nobody minds if I say just because other people are persuaded of propaganda doesn't mean that they have the truth. Everyone's fine with that. But then when I say it about you, maybe you get uncomfortable. Maybe you say, no, I'm persuaded, it's my opinion, it's not true or false, it's my truth, it can't be false. This is part of what philosophy does, and I'll use a metaphor like with science. If science says that all bodies with mass are attracted to each other, that's basically gravity, right? I know it looks like the apple falls, but the apple doesn't fall. It's that the mass of the earth greatly attracts the mass of the apple. But if science says, and we will all believe, objects with mass are attracted to each other and it's proportionate to how much mass the items have. If you believe that, and then I point to an individual thing with mass and ask you if it's going to be attracted to other things with mass, you don't get to just say, I don't know, or no, unless you have some objection specifically. Unless you introduce some new idea, we are allowed to, in fact, we have to move from the general idea, all objects with mass are attracted to each other, proportionate to the mass the object has. And we have to move from there to the next idea. This particular object with mass is attracted to other objects with mass. Right? So what philosophy says, and I know you don't like me saying this, and Socrates is going to run into trouble for saying something similar in 1 second. But when I say the general truth, that persuasion or belief or opinion are not the same thing as truth, everybody nods. Democrats roll their eyes and mumble under their mouth, Republicans. Republicans roll their eyes and mutter under their mouth, Democrats. We're all fine believing this about other people. And then I say, okay, surely some of your persuasions, beliefs, opinions are false, not true. Then we get all defensive and we go, hey, buddy, that's not what I pay you for, professor. I don't pay you to tell me that kind of stuff. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so I do mean this to be personal, because if we're going to use truth in philosophy to improve our lives, we have to be willing to apply it to ourselves, right? Okay. I also point this out because I want to show in Socrates, and also in other readings we do, the sort of standard toolkit of philosophy. One part of the standard toolkit of philosophy is what I have just said. If we make a claim that, let's start over. If I make a claim and you agree with that claim, and I apply that claim to other things, if you agreed to it the first time, you should agree to it the second time when I apply it to other objects. Unless you can give some specific objection why it doesn't apply. You know what I mean? Like maybe you can find an object that gravity doesn't affect because of its mass, but you'd have some reason for that, right? You'd have some objection for that specific thing. So when we lack specific objections, if we agree with an idea at time 1, we have to agree with it at time 2. Right? That's just how it works. And you and I wouldn't really be able to have conversations if, say, the words we use constantly had a different meaning. We have to use them consistently so we can talk to each other. Okay, and just a little bit more about this, and then we'll take a break in the recording. I like to give these breaks so that you can stretch your legs, let the blood flow back up to your brain. So if you want to break up our class into a little bit of work every day, it's easier to do a little bit of work every day when I stop the recordings. Okay, so we're going to stop it soon. Okay? But what I want to say here is you both have to, in philosophy, take the ideas personally, try to apply them to your life, and also don't take them too personally. I know it sounds like a paradox, but here's what I mean. Socrates is not trying to prove you wrong. I am not trying to prove you wrong when I say that just because somebody specific, you, is persuaded doesn't mean that they have the truth. I'm not trying to say anything bad about you. Okay? It's that philosophy, Socrates and myself, are simply trying to say that just because something, just because you feel strong, just because somebody feels strongly about something, you, me, Socrates, doesn't mean that any one of us has the necessary truth. We might be confused, we might be misled by other people, but that's fine. That doesn't mean that you screwed up. It means you have a chance to grow and improve as a person. Sorry, this motorcycle drove by my window while I was recording that. It's very loud. Okay, the point is to take it personally in the good way, not take it personally in the bad way. When there is this challenge thrown down by me, Socrates, anybody else we read, the point is to not feel like they've been telling you you're wrong and attacking you. It's that you can tell yourself, leave them out of it. You can tell yourself that there might be a place here where you can grow, evolve, and self-improve. You will not be improved by me. You will not be improved by an even better philosopher, Socrates. You will self-improve if you so choose to do when you use the readings. They won't make you evolve. You can evolve in response to them. So the point is not that anyone is wrong or has bad ideas. It's that all of us could have better ideas if we put in the work. So we'll end this recording right here. I'm going to stand up and stretch my legs, get a little drink of water. I recommend you do the same. Then we'll come back and we'll keep working through details of the reading. Okay? Sound good? Okay. See you in a moment.